So thank you all for participating in our Women in the Workplace panel. I guess I'll just have our girl to girl board directors introduce themselves. Some of us already have, but and then we're gonna go into a land acknowledgement and then just making sure everyone's names are updated and such. So I'm Rithika. I'm one of the co-executive directors of Girl to Girl, and then I'll pass it
I'm,
off to Jasmine.
Thank you. Hi again. I'm Jasmine. I'm also the co-executive director of Girl to Girl alongside Ritika. I'll pass it off to Harleen.
Yeah, I'm Harleen, and I'm in charge of fund development, and I'll pass it on to Komal.
Hi everyone, I'm Komal. I'm the social media director for Girl to Girl. Pass it off to Meghna.
Hi everyone, I'm Meghna. I'm the administrator with Girl to Girl, and I'll pass it on to Hardeep.
Hey guys, I'm Harney and I'm the projects director for Girl to Girl.
And now, before we meet all of our lovely panelists, I'm going to read out our land acknowledgement. We recognize and respect that we are on Treaty 6 territory, the land of the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others. We commit to educating ourselves on Indigenous ways of knowing and continuously sharing these spirited and salient stories of the past, present, and future. And I also wanted to add that Chantel will be reading her own land acknowledgement all the way from Calgary.
Yeah, thank you. So I am joining from Calgary, which is traditional Treaty 7 territory. And that includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, which is home to the Siksika, the Kainai, and the Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, Stoney Nakoda Nations, which includes the Bearspaw, Chiniki, and Wesley Nations, and is home to Métis Nation 3, Region 3. And I think it's really beautiful how you added why it's important to you, because I think with land acknowledgement, it's really helpful to kind of explain that why for you, the why for your organization. And so I'll tell you a little bit about my why. I grew up in rural Northeast Alberta, really with quite a large Indigenous population, primarily Cree, Dene. And as a result of that, I have seen the consequences of colonialism and systems of white supremacy. And so for me, an acknowledgement is an acknowledgement of those consequences and the personal benefit I received as a white person in that system. It's also an acknowledgement for individuals and organizations who are often who I'm dealing with, that we are able to thrive as people, as businesses, because of the historical and present stewardship of Indigenous peoples, especially Indigenous women across the country. So that's my why, and I encourage you all to think of your why.
Thank you, Chantel. That was really well said. And also, I'm not too sure if you guys were able to see in the chat, but we would really love if everyone could update their Zoom names to include their personal pronouns. So this just ensures that we are creating that inclusive space for everyone who is here to join us today. And if you don't know how, you just hover over the box with your face on it, and there should be a little blue box with 3 dots, and there should be a rename option from there, and you can go ahead and add that. Thanks, guys.
Awesome, thank you. So now that we have introduced our Girl to Girl board, I would like to give another warm thank you to our 4 female guest speakers that are here with us today and participating in our Women in the Workplace discussion. So I'd like to give them the opportunity to introduce themselves. So if you want to include your name and a little bit about yourself, that would be awesome. We'll start with Dr. Sharif.
Thank you. I'm so impressed with the women in this room today. It's absolutely exceptional to see such a fantastic organization that's run by so many young women that are already, I'm sure, up and coming in your own areas. My name is Dr. Farah Sharif. I have 3 girls at age 19, 15, and oh my gosh, almost 12. I'm married to my first and only love. We've been married for 22 years this June. I met him while we were very young. My kids don't know the real story, so we'll just keep it at that. I am born and raised in Edmonton. My parents are immigrants to Edmonton. My mom came from Uganda in the early 1960s. My dad came from Pakistan in the early 1960s as well. as Muslim immigrants. My mom was Shia Ismaili, my dad is Sunni Muslim, and they met on campus and fell in love and had a very taboo, not a common love story, but I like to call them the very first intersectional OG feminists in my life, kind of set the stage for what was to come. I grew up in St. Albert, which very much implicated and impacted the kind of educator I am today. I went to the University of Alberta. I did my first degree in elementary education, graduated, got married, moved to Toronto, went to York University straight out of undergrad. We can talk about that later, the pros and cons. I did my master's degree at York University while working and bussing tables. Delivered my first baby when I dropped my master's dissertation off at the editors. We moved back home to Edmonton with a 1-year-old. I ended up teaching in my old junior high in St. Albert, which is another story entirely. Right before I went on my mat leave with my second baby at the time, I thought, what am I going to do for a year? I might as well go back to school. So I found myself applying to grad school again. Had Sophia, that's my 15-year-old, went to grad school when she was 6 months old to start a PhD, finished my PhD, ended up with 3 kids, and never left the University of Alberta. So that's kind of like my life in a nutshell. Thank you for having me today.
Would you like me to go next?
Yeah,
so my name is Chantal Sabai. I have had a few different careers at this point, and I'm not one who gets too fussed about titles because I think that sometimes they handcuff us a little bit. So the background with me is I grew up, as I mentioned, in kind of rural Northeast Alberta. I came to the University of Alberta when I was 17 to start university. I did a business degree, kind of, because I applied into law school a little bit before I was done and I got in. So I went, finished my law degree at the U of A. I articled at a big firm, worked in law for about 6 years, left to have my son in 2017, who's now 3.5. While I was on maternity leave, I was nudged. Some feelings prior to maternity leave nudged me, and those feelings were largely driven by the US election. So I was feeling a lot of pain and feeling a lot of pain from women around me as well in response to kind of the increased rhetoric and the challenging of rights that I assumed were entrenched. And so I took that feeling and I started a not-for-profit called Director Network that helps to try and increase the number and types of women who consider themselves board candidates. I returned from mat leave in law, but this governance bug had got me. And so I joined a management consulting group doing kind of exclusively board governance work. And that led me to create an online governance platform that's looking at helping boards be more strategic in an accessible, scalable way. So kind of through this online platform. So that's what I do now. And I'm married and have a husband who was a former lawyer who also has taken an entrepreneurial path. So our lives are not dull, but we've got a lot of good stories now. So that's me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's amazing. All right. I think it was Megan.
Hello, everyone. I just want to say thank you for asking me our group, Edmonton Women in Policing, to be a part of this today. I'm representing other police members as well as civilians that are on our group. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but my name is Megan McIntyre. Been a police officer for 14 years. I got hired at the young age of 21. Before that, I went to Grant MacEwan and I played hockey there. And I took police studies, which after listening to everyone else's education journeys, I feel a little bit inadequate. But so I got hired at 21. I'm 35 now. I work in Alert Internet Child Exploitation Unit. I've worked in other areas like patrol, West Division Special Projects Team, as well as Alert Organized Crime and Gang Enforcement. I've recently been promoted, this last promotion, and will start my new job at the end of May. You can probably hear my kids in the background. I'm married. I've been married for almost 9 years and have 3 children. 1 is 6 and 2 are 5. I coach my kids in hockey still. I do some volunteer work as well, and including being a part of the Edmonton Women in Policing Working Group. That's probably just about it.
That's awesome. Hired at 21. That's amazing. Ravina. Sorry, I know you were supposed to go before. I completely.
Oh, no worries. Just go with the flow.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Ravina. I'm a born and raised Edmontonian and a very proud Albertan. So I'm excited to share this space with you today. I guess I sort of have a career journey that's still continuing, of course. I, growing up, read a lot of different books, was really exposed to a multidisciplinary education. And so when I entered university as well, even though I was pursuing a Bachelor of Science, I was a keen bean and I wanted to learn more about the humanities side. And so I did research in religion and politics and freedom of speech, as well as in genetics and obesity. And so I really tried to broaden my scope of what I was exposed to. And during that time too, I was very passionate about not just getting an education within the institution, but learning beyond the borders of a classroom. So gaining experiential learning and seeing ways in which I could learn about different cultures and different geographical regions to really understand the big problems that we as a society were going to face. Afterwards, I decided to pursue a Master's of Public Policy and Global Affairs at the University of British Columbia. And I focused on security, tech, and defense. I had the opportunity to go and work alongside and research ways on gendered violence in conflict regions. I traveled to The Hague, Geneva, New York, and did some incredible work with some incredible people. And during that time, I was also very, very passionate about technology, building technology, using technology to solve problems, specifically through a social entrepreneurship lens. And so taking that business mindset and applying it to social impact ventures in a way that could be sustainable and sort of redefining how we look at business and entrepreneurship. And that led me to co-found a company alongside my co-founder, Michelle, called Flick, which helps connect young women such as yourselves or women, no matter where they really are in their career trajectory, with established female founders and female leaders through meaningful apprenticeships. And to date, we've matched over 2,000 women from over 55 different countries. On my academic path, I'm currently on a leave from medical school, and I'm working on building out Flick. Eventually, we'll go back as well and continue to pursue that route of my passion for both combining medicine and space exploration through a computational lens. So that's a little bit about me, bit of a mouthful, but I think someone alluded to it before, Chantel, that there's different pathways to getting to where you want to go, and really taking a different unconventional path to both your education and also your experiences. So excited to share.
Wow, Ravina, that was awesome. A lot of us have actually looked into Flick, and we think it's such an amazing platform. So amazing job. I'll actually pass it off to Ritika, and she's just going to give a brief rundown of what's going to happen next and what everything's going to consist of. Ritika.
Thank you all for sharing. It's nice to see, it doesn't have to be like a straight path, like Ravina kind of said, and Chantel. I think a lot of us, especially at this age, get caught up in numbers and calculating how old we're gonna be when we finish this, how old we're gonna be when we do this. But it's just nice to hear an unconventional path. Okay, so this is kind of how things are gonna go. So we're gonna have 3 questions. And we're going to let each panelist answer each question. And then, so there's 3 questions, and then we'll have a brief Q&A period. So if any of the participants have any questions or anything that we didn't really touch on in our questions, as ours are mainly focused on, I guess, being a woman in the workplace. And then we'll have some closing remarks, and that's pretty much all. But yeah, from now we can pass on to, I believe, Meghna, who will start us off.
I also wanted to add before we start, I love all of your stories and I'm already feeling so inspired, but I will read the first question. Can you tell us about a discriminatory encounter that you've had in your career journey and how you've dealt with it? If not, what are the biggest obstacles you faced in your career journey due to your gender? And of course, feel free to answer both questions. So we'll start off with Dr. Sharif.
All right. Since I'm the oldest one on the panel, I'm sure I have a different perspective to offer. You know, to be honest with you, when we think about the area of education, we think that it's primarily an area of our society that is led by women. And while that is true in the school setting, at the higher kind of academia level, it's very much led by old white men. And so when I entered into grad school, I don't have a lot of recollection of my first round of graduate school, which says a lot about the life experiences I've had. As you grow older, sometimes when you have major life experiences like, you know, marriage, children, job stresses, you know, those things kind of, and as I don't know, for the moms on the panel, with every child, those experiences get repressed and my ability to remember things is a little bit compromised. But the most amount of, I guess the most vivid recollections I have is from when I was in graduate school with my PhD at the University of Alberta. And I remember I was 28 years old with Maya must have been 5 and Sophia was 6 months old, right? Did I do the math right? No, Maya would have been 4 and Sophia was 6 months old because they're 3.5 years apart. And I remember sitting in my first graduate course during a summer institute. It was July, it was hot, it was nursing, I was uncomfortable. And I remember these, and you know, women are also guilty of this. So these women who kind of thought like, oh, how sweet, she brought her baby and she's nursing and how uncomfortable for them. And back then nursing in public was not a thing. And then there was men in the room as well. And I don't remember the specific conversations, but I remember leaving that first class thinking, how am I going to do this? Because all people were fascinated at my age. And I will say that most people in that class were probably my age now, early 40s to mid to late 50s. I was 28 and had a little baby. And so ageism was the real deal back then in that moment. But more specifically, and I remember this from some of the women who thought, but oh, your children are so young and like, who's going to look after them? Do you have a nanny? Like, how are you going to do grad school? Who's going to take care of your kids? And I remember thinking like, what planet are these people from? Like, you can't be young and be a mom and go to, like, we're in education, you know? So I remember that being a very vivid obstacle for me, being young and being a woman. And as I realize now, I was the only woman of color for many years until I met another now colleague. Her name is Dr. Mariam Sikandi, who is from Nigeria, I believe. We were the only 2 women of color in our program. And so that alone had its own problems. And so gender-based and age-based, and I was on the other side of the age-based discrimination because all of these folks were older than me, and just couldn't believe that I was this young mom who had decided to go back to school. And what was interesting, I had another baby throughout that program. So I had Sophia, and she was 6 months old, and you know, it took a year off when Elisa was born. So it took me 5 years to finish, but I started off with 1.5 children and ended up with 3. And so, you know, for these people to see me just keep like pumping out kids and getting all the scholarships, and it really pissed them off. So the more they kept telling me like, oh, but what about your children? I'm like, oh, here's another one, and here's another one. Like, I just kept having babies. And so the more people would say like, oh, how are you going to look after your children? The more it motivated me to show them like, actually, I am having my cake and I'm eating it too. How do you like those apples? And so, it was very motivating for me. And I think I got that from my dad, that the more people tried to dissuade me or discourage me, I just used it as fuel. So those are two really vivid experiences with intersectional sexism, ageism, and racism. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I was gonna say it's like an intersecting amount of things, that it's not just gender, it's also so many other things. But I really like that instead of letting people put you down, you just said, no, watch me do it, which is really awesome. So thank you for that. And next we'll hear from Chantel.
Yeah, so I think my answer is going to be primarily driven from my time in law, which won't surprise a lot of folks. It's really interesting for me, and I have had conversations with our governing body, so the Law Society of Alberta, around this distinction, because when I was in law school, which is about 10 years ago now, and or when I graduated was about 10 years ago now, and prior to that and current day, you see the gender mix be about 50-50 in law school itself. So you're about equal, but what we see as women progress in the profession, that number changes. And so we have about 65% men in leadership, partnership, these kind of roles, and 35% women. And it's a risk that the Law Society contemplates, because if you can imagine, if you have half and half, you've lost some of your best performers when you get to that 65-35 ratio. And the Law Society cares about that because that's an additional risk, because if lawyers get sued, the Law Society has to respond. So it's a real risk. And I think the profession really has to take a good look at itself, and it's starting to, but it's quite glacial. So I'll tell you a little bit, maybe some of the shocking stories I experienced, particularly when I was articling. I really resonated with what Dr. Sharif said about this treatment coming from both men and women. So on the men's side of things, we had myself and one of my dearest friends, we articled together, and there was two individuals who articled at the same time as us. One was male, one was a woman, and this senior partner always gave just myself and my friend Elsa the tip of the day. Never Matt, just me and Elsa. And the tip of the day included such wisdom as, girls, you should drink ginger ale out of a short glass at events so that you look like you're networking, but you don't get drunk. And we're like, I will end you. So I can relate to Dr. Sharif's use it as fuel. I think that definitely was there. And the maybe next piece I will add to that, though, is I really had to get to a point where I had to check myself and say, am I just doing this to prove to all these people that I can, or because I actually want to? And I think that is a trap we sometimes fall into as women, in that we are so keen to prove we can do it that we lose ourselves a little bit in it. So it's one kind of tip I'll give to you is, you can prove to everyone that you're worth it, but do you actually want to do it? And sometimes you can't know that. Sometimes it takes some time to figure out the distinction between being overwhelmed, being scared, trying to prove to other people. And so sometimes time is the only solution. But I really encourage folks in their early career journey to do a check-in, do a 6-month check-in about, I'm liking this because X, I'm struggling with it because X, and who am I in all of this? So that'll be my example.
Thank you, Chantel. I think that's a really important tip to keep in mind when a lot of us are in university, so just keeping ourselves in check. Next, I'll pass it on to Ravina.
Yeah, so I feel like to some degree, sometimes I genuinely was very fortunate to be in such a supportive environment here in Edmonton. And I think being surrounded by strong women, especially whether they were my professors or people in the community, sort of allowed me to be sheltered from what was actually going on in the world. And yes, you could read about gender discrimination and what women were facing, but I at that time hadn't really encountered it myself, though I had done a lot of reading on it. And I have to say, for example, like having Dr. Sharif within the Edmonton community and having someone like her be such a strong figure for women, and then having my professors who were also these remarkable women, made me feel confident in the work that I could do or the things that I could achieve. But it wasn't until I left the city and left the province and went to Toronto to take part in an entrepreneurship program where I really started to see these systematic discriminations and these subtle things that were happening around me. And that is essentially the reason why Flick was born, because when I got to Toronto and I was part of this amazing program, there were definitely a lack of female founders and investors around me that I did feel uncomfortable at times. And, you know, it's good to push yourself outside your comfort zone, for example, but having a lack of representation around me was really something that I had to grapple with. And to Dr. Sharif's point before, when I went into that program, I was the only woman of color. And I remember saying to myself, South Asian women are so smart. Like, why don't I have more Indian women around me? Because I was so confused. I was like, this is not right. This shouldn't be happening. And I was very new to the whole business and entrepreneurial world. You know, coming from STEM, policy, and tech, it was just one area that I never dabbled into. To be honest, I never knew why people even studied business. Now I completely understand the whole space. But at that time, it was something very difficult to go by with. So I remember we were pitching to a gentleman who was a white male, and he just looked back at us and said, you know what, I'm sure what you're doing is great, but I just don't understand that female entrepreneurial space that you're trying to tap into, and I can't help you. Well, what were we supposed to do then? We didn't know anyone in the space. I mean, we decided to sort of go and cold outreach other women, but at that time, that was who we had as a potential investor. And so while all of our male colleagues were getting investment for creating essentially just an idea, not even a prototype, it was very difficult for us to grapple with that, as I mentioned before. So it's these very small things, but having a lack of representation and a lack of women or women of color at the table was definitely, I think, a hindrance at first when my co-founder and I were trying to create something new and create something that was going to inspire young women to also get into this world of entrepreneurship.
Thank you, Ravina. Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of us definitely do have those role models, so I can totally see why it was hindering at first to not have that. Next, we'll pass it on to Megan.
Thank you. I can echo everything the ladies have said before me. Mine, like I said, I've been in policing for 14 years. My dad was a police officer, and then my brother joined about 3 years before I did. But I have more specific examples when I had about 3.5 years on the job as in patrol. And we had a West Division Special Projects team that consisted of about 6 members and 1 sergeant. It was plainclothes, it was surveillance, targeted high-level criminals and drug addicts and whatever else. And my partner for 3 years in patrol had applied and got a position there. And so I followed suit with him, and in the next posting, I also applied. At that time, there was 2 other women in my patrol squad, and my sergeant was a male and quite senior at the time as well. And when I went to go put in my application, he basically told me you were not qualified. And so him and I were actual personal friends. And when he told me I wasn't qualified, I honestly cried in front of him. And I just felt so awful. And so, like Dr. Sri said, it gave me some, it just drove me even harder to want to be in that position. So I applied. the sergeant of that team ultimately selected 3 people, 2 men and me. And I was on the team for about 2.5 years, and he had told me about a year on the team, so about 4.5, 5 years on, that after he selected me, he received numerous emails from other men asking why he selected me. And so it's a little bit disappointing. And I grew up playing hockey, which was male dominated. I have numerous male friends. And to be honest with you, I just was one of the guys and thought I always was and I always fit in. So I never looked at myself differently than my peers. So some of these things coming through made me realize kind of what I was up against. Now, being on the street team gave me 2.5 years of experience in drug work. I ended up having my first child, so I went on maternity leave. Came back pregnant with the twins, did some time in Northwest Division, went off on maternity leave and came back. I applied to ALERT, to Organized Crime and Gang Enforcement, and I was successful in that posting. 2 people were selected, me and another male. So out 4.5 years, I go to put in promotion this last year, which was a very crazy long process. Some of the women on this panel understand that. They are my peers as well. And in my promotional interview, one of the men asked me, if you were promoted, where would you want to go? Because, you know, you have children. And I was like, that doesn't mean anything, patrol. I want to be a patrol sergeant. And he was like, oh my God, wow. And to me, I was thinking, like, just because I have children doesn't mean I'm willing to step back. Some do just because of family circumstances, and that's their own thing that they need to deal with. But at this time, that never held me back. Having kids never held me back. And of course, when we go through education and like one of the ladies said, okay, how old are we going to be when we graduate? How old are we going to be here? When are we going to have kids? What year are we retiring? Everybody does that. And so, yes, you can have it all. But my advice is maybe not all at once, but never think that going through life and having kids is going to put you back. It's not if you're driven to go through. So there was a couple things, like those are just a couple things. I mean, I've worked with men that have treated me differently than their own peers. I mean, it takes in our profession that is 100% male dominated. I was the only female in a team of 6 men. And that has been my career for 14 years. I've been primarily the only female. So I've always dealt with they looked at me differently, or they thought my skills weren't as good as theirs because I was a woman. And I've always fought for a seat at the table. And I think that's why I'm not ready to sit down and take it. And I've always been vocal and always encourage people to be treated properly. And so there's other people on this panel, like I said, that are also police officers that have their own experience. And mine is unique to myself, but everyone that I've worked with, men and women in policing, have their own journey, and that it's a long career. And you start off maybe as single, no kids, you work through, you have children, okay, your kids are young and you need to deal with school, and then they grow up. And so things change, your journey changes, but my advice is always never accept no. And that you are just as qualified as everyone else. And we need to keep in mind that gender-based discrimination is sometimes unconscious and a conscious bias. And that when we look back, obviously, and historically, we've always had to fight for what we have today. And so even with my 3 kids, like my one kid is like, that's for girls, or haha, you're a girl. And he's 5. And I think about, obviously, I've never taught him that. And it's just throughout social media and within society. So though people say silly comments that we look back and say, you probably shouldn't have said that, sometimes they don't mean that, because that's just inbred in the way we've all grown up. So sometimes we need to give a little people some slack. Sometimes it's the pattern of behavior. And as you go on through your career, you will understand who is on your side and who's not. Men and women will always have allies. And so we need to go with the allies we have and leave all the negative people behind. So we'll always face gender discrimination. It's just we need to step up and not accept it. So that's my parting to that question.
Thank you so much, Megan. I definitely agree that a lot of us, like even girls, have been socialized to think that when we do have kids, we need to step back. We need to take care of our children, and that's totally fine, but we shouldn't have to give up our dreams or our goals just for that to also happen. So thank you for that. And I'll pass it on to Harneet to ask our next question.
Okay, so how do you keep yourself motivated in spite of these encounters and/or obstacles? So, Dr. Sharif?
Really good question. So I think the first thing that I do, well, first of all, there's this thing called imposter syndrome that, plagues women. I think it plagues men too, but I think it plagues women more. And kind of how Megan was talking about how, we've been socialized into thinking. I believe that society has socialized women into believing that we are not, good enough, strong enough, smart enough, whatever enough. And I think I was actually having this conversation with my 15-year-old daughter the other day when we were out on a walk. And she was talking to me about how my kids have been online at home learning online because I have elderly parents, and she's returning to school for an advanced acting class. She's just very, very passionate about acting. And she said, sometimes, Mom, I think to myself, how am I going to be, all these kids that I'm in acting class with have been in person all year. And she got the lead role in her play. And so she's like, I sometimes feel nervous about my ability to represent what I know I can actually do. But, that's just imposter syndrome. And I kind of looked at her and I'm like, where did you learn that word? And she's like, oh, I hear you talk about it all the time. And so because this conversation is top of mind, we just had it a couple of days ago. I'm reminded that sometimes imposter syndrome is that internal voice that plays and you're not really aware that it's there. So what keeps me motivated is something I read, a couple of years ago: white men fail upwards. And so when we tell ourselves that we can't do it, we shouldn't do it, I look at all the people that are around me in academia as well, who really shouldn't be there, but they are. And so I think to myself, well, if they can do it, I can do it too. And I think I'm way more qualified or way more smart or whatever. And so keeping imposter syndrome kind of at the forefront of my mind, that half the time when we don't think we can do something, it's not because we actually think it, it's because we've been socialized into believing that we can't. And so how I keep myself motivated is just being fully aware of the forces that are around me that are, these external and implicit messages at the same time that kind of feed us things and make us believe certain things. So yeah, that's what keeps me motivated.
Awesome. I think that was really well said. Thank you. And Chantel?
Yeah, so I'll talk about it a little bit from the approach of, the thing happened and now what? So something happened, an incident happened, and you're in the moment, now what? And I think for me, it's figuring out how you need to process that. And that's going to be different for everyone. And that's going to be something you're going to need to figure out for yourself personally. Some good options include a network of friends or trusted people that you can talk it through with. I still have a group of girlfriends from law school that we have a text message chain that is such a source of venting, getting it out. There's going to be different ways it needs to come out. And in those for early moments, it might very well just be, I need to vent with someone who's a trusted source I can vent to. But I think about the processing part too, because sometimes you vent and you're like, okay, it's done, whatever. I should be over it. I should be this, I should be that. And it's not realizing that maybe it lives in your body in a certain way. It's coming back in your mind in certain ways. And so, maybe you need to sweat it out. Maybe you need to talk to someone about it who has additional resources for you to think about how you can process it. And so within my group of girlfriends, I would say all of us have some sort of therapist, coach, counselor, just to have tools to figure out how to process things. Some of those are going to be, the junk that comes up from being who we are. And some of that's just going to be life stuff. And so I think it's important to recognize your process piece. And then I think when you're thinking about your process piece, you got to think, okay, proactively, what happens next time? Because I know I've personally dealt with situations where part of the grief and the trauma is feeling guilty that I didn't stand up for myself, or I didn't act in a certain way. And so can you create some boundaries around what your no-goes are, what your your solid lines where you will feel very confident, and can you even draft out some language and practice saying it so you have that kind of repetition in your body to respond with. And then I will just end with the last piece is give yourself grace, because in those early days in my career, there were a lot of things happening. There was power dynamics, there was me learning, there was me trying to prove myself, all of these pieces. And so there was a lot of times I didn't get it right. I didn't kind of stand up for myself or others in the way I wish I had. But I think the best you can do is learn from that and, figure out your path for being proactive and processing along the way.
Yeah, exactly. I can think of a lot of times where I was like, oh, I wish I said something else. But yeah, thank you. Ravina?
Yeah, I think there's two sides of me or mindsets that have allowed me to sort of encounter, battle whatever comes in my way. And so I think the first thing is recognizing how privileged I am to be in this country, to be on this land, and to have these opportunities around me. And so I think because I've inherently really taken that on and understood that, I find that I don't try to complain about the circumstances around me as much. Instead, I try to have a mindset that I'm a doer, I'm a builder, and I want to fix that or create a new system. And so for me, it's leveraging that privilege that I do have right now and the opportunities that I have right now to ensure that I can create systems or solutions that can hopefully provide accessibility to those that don't have the privileges that I've been afforded with. And so even though I may encounter certain situations or different barriers that, in the first place shouldn't necessarily be there and are rooted in discriminatory practices, I try to relay back to what I do have in the moment and what I can take advantage of. And so for me, it's super important that I do take advantage of my privileges in order to help create opportunity for other people that don't have that access. And so for me, that has been very fundamental to my mission and purpose in life. So that's a mindset that's allowed me to sort of move through whatever I see in front of me. And then I think the second thing is, for me, really taking in humility and this mindset that the worst thing that can happen is someone says no to me or decides to reject me. It's sort of that thing of, if you don't ask or if you don't try, if you don't get started, you'll never know. You'll never know that answer. And sort of to what some of the women alluded to earlier is, if you do get that no, maybe that fuels your fire to go and do something else or come back and try again. And I think it's that mindset, though, of having humility and also acknowledging that there are amazing people out there. And truly, I've come across the most remarkable women out there. And so sometimes I do think, if I got rejected from something, it might either be redirection or it's the fact that this other remarkable woman got the opportunity to do that. And that's completely okay with me. Just acknowledging I may not be the the best or the most qualified applicant in that moment, and it just wasn't the right timing for me. So feeling happy and excited for the opportunity that other people around me can get. I've traditionally been even known as a hype girl because I get so excited for other people's achievements, even when I don't receive them myself. I believe that their win is my win because it's one step further to improving the world or the community that we have around us. So yeah, in summary, 2 things: acknowledging your privilege, understanding that, and how you can leverage that to provide opportunities for those that don't have that. And the second thing is, the worst thing that can happen is a no, and taking that humility with you no matter what you decide to do.
Yeah, awesome. I think that's a really good mindset to have. Thank you. And Megan?
My experiences are a little bit, when I talk about, I'm going to kind of go off Chantel with saying something happened and then how did you deal with it and how did you move forward type of approach to the question. So obviously I've had to overcome a little bit of things in my last job. My sergeant, who's a white male, prevented me from experience a little bit, treated me differently than my peers, wasn't supportive. I wrote a bunch of things down. I'm willing to see my success compared to my colleagues, etc. And I think the most important thing when Ravina said when you get the no or not the support is that your work ethic and drive will see you through. And like she said, is the rejection is a redirection, and it's 100% true. And I think to overcome some difficulty, your willingness to move forward will kind of take you there. I also want to say when you do overcome situations that people have put you in, you always have to ensure that you talk to the person about your expectations as well as their expectations. So something that you, and I've been guilty of this, where I hear something, someone says something to me directly, and I either internalize it or I personalize it. And I have to talk it out. Like I cannot, there's an elephant in the room, I have to go talk to that person about it. So I approached my boss several times to ensure that him and I were on the same page and that I was always willing to meet his expectations as well as my expectations. Unfortunately, at the time, he didn't really have any expectation for me, and I had to part ways with my job at that time. But I've always been a competitive person, grew up playing sports. Policing is very competitive. We're all type A. We all want to be number one. We all want to be the guy in the room, right? So I've never thought I couldn't achieve my goals. I know I can achieve my goals. It's just a matter of when and how. And I've been fortunate, and then like when Ravita said, talking about privilege, I've been very fortunate enough in my career up into this point. And I do realize that other people have had a harder journey than I have and a different journey. So my parting comments is we'll all have things to overcome. Life, school, your career moving forward, we'll all have to overcome things, but it just makes everything so much sweeter. And when it comes to men and women, like Amanda said on the chat there, men typically put in for promotion and jobs when they're 50% ready, and women have to be beyond ready. And the women that have achieved high ranks within our service, they've gotten there, but it's just taken longer. So though you might not get it in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, know that you can still achieve that, and you will have to overcome something. Like there's no easy way, and just continue doing your thing and do what's best for you. Always take care of yourself when you have to overcome. Like I had to step away from drug work and I moved to a different area, which ultimately was the best thing I could have done. So you go where the wind takes you, and it might not be your direct path you thought you were going to get there, but you will get there. So always rely on your work ethic and your drive, and you'll overcome anything that comes through.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's really important to just keep moving and stay positive through it all. Yeah. And I'm going to hand it over to Gomo.
Awesome. Thanks for leading that question round, Harneet. I just want to start off by saying I am very sorry for the amount of noise in the background. I'm at school and I probably should not have decided to sit in the fine arts building. But so the next question is, if you were to start in your industry now, what would you do differently? If nothing, what last piece of advice would you give to the youth in this Zoom panel that are just beginning their career journey? You can answer one question or both. So we'll pass it off to, I forgot who was leading, Dr. Sharif.
Okay. So I think everyone's path is different, which is very much the theme of all of the panelists today, and the advice that they're, so gracefully sharing. My path was definitely non-conventional. I got married young by choice, had kids young by choice, and continued my career at the same time. Definitely not easy, but I wouldn't have done it any other way. So, as far as advice goes, I think, when I was younger, and my husband and I decided to get married, instead of kind of splitting up and, doing the distance relationship thing, none of my friends were even dating yet. So even when we had kids, none of our friends were even married. And so, I think choose the path that is right for you. If it's kids or no kids or partner or no partner or go it alone, I think the path that is destined for you is your path. I think so much of the advice that the women on the panel today shared, be super aware of boundaries, making sure that you're doing things for the right reasons. I didn't actually want to be a teacher when I was growing up. I wanted to be in law. My path kind of changed, and I ended up pursuing graduate degree upon graduate degree. One, because I didn't really want to grow up yet and go into the real world, even though I ended up working and studying, which I don't know how that happened. But I also figured out in my mid 30s, I had already started the PhD. So I had discovered mid PhD that I ended up doing a PhD just for my dad to be able to say all three of his kids are, doctor something, which was a real big epiphany for me mid program with 2.5 children. So I kind of begrudgingly finished it, but I'm really glad that I did, because it's afforded me so many different opportunities. So as far as advice goes, I wouldn't have done it any other way. I will say that studying and having children was no easy feat, but I also had an excellent partner in crime who helped me out. And so just don't do what everybody else is doing, and listen to what your own path tells you. And it might pull you in different directions. You probably will lose friends, but what the conversation that we've been having around our home lately is that you have groups of friends in different phases of your life, and they come into your life and they leave your life for very specific reasons. And so the advice that I would give to you is trust your gut. I didn't learn to trust my gut until my mid 30s. But it's the number one lesson I teach my 3 children, literally out of the womb. If it feels right, follow it. And if it doesn't feel right, don't let anybody try and dissuade you from trusting your own instinct, because it's the most powerful thing that you own as a woman. So that's my advice.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Dr. Sharif. And I will say, I think it's great that you're speaking about the fact that you can still be successful and have children, because I actually want to go into law as well. And what I've heard is from people is, oh, well, she's a really successful lawyer, but she chose not to have children. I'm like, come on now, But all right, so the next speaker, I believe, was Chantel.
Yeah, so I'm going to approach this from the angle of you're starting your career and things are happening, and how do I kind of make my space, but also make my space in a way that feels really good, where I feel like I'm advocating for the things that are important to me. And so I would encourage you in your workplaces to
plant the seeds for curious conversation wherever you go. I think when it comes to creating change, there's a lot of different ways it can happen. Top down, bottom up, side to side, all sorts of ways. And it is shocking how when you create a space for conversation to have, and it feels like people are allowed to come in, how they sometimes will. And I, in my law experience, I worked in a department where I was the only woman amongst 10 men. And I went to so many sports bars and ate so many wings, and it was never my thing. But I dropped a lot of seeds of conversation, and I dropped them repetitively, and they took some traction after some time. And so I encourage you to continue those little bits of conversation for the things that are important for you, especially in spaces where they're not happening. And it might feel scary, but test it, try it, and see. Maybe you'll find some really great colleagues, some new people that you wouldn't have expected to connect with as a result. And then I think, similar to what Dr. Sharif had said, for me, it's this really interesting balance. And I think I'm still figuring it out for myself about knowing my boundaries, holding them, holding others accountable to those boundaries while still calling them into change. Because it's really easy to shut people out and push them away. And that can be necessary. Absolutely. You can lose people because they have to be lost. But there is a balance of when they can be called in and change can happen. And so I don't think there's an easy solution to that. I think it's a forever kind of molding and figuring it out. And when I'm, on that path myself, but I invite you to kind of contemplate that as well.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I think conversations are extremely important to have, especially in our group where I think we all almost have immigrant parents. And sometimes it is hard to talk to them like, well, Mom, I actually don't want to do this. And I actually don't want to get married either. But so conversations are always very important. All right. And then I'll pass it off to Ravina.
That makes me laugh because, honestly, my mom's great. And she's never even put that pressure of like marriage or anything, but I feel like I'm around a certain age now where now she's like, so have you like ever met a boy or anything? And I'm like, okay, what are you trying to get to here? I'm like, leave me alone. So that's funny. But okay, I have like a few different things. They might be a little bit all over the place, but as you guys I'm sure could tell, I feel like I'm part of like 7 different industries, but I don't think we should even have separate industries. Everything is so interrelated and interconnected. And one big thing I hope as you continue on through your career or your education is try to be as multidisciplinary as you can. I think becoming a deep generalist and working in different spaces can really help you forge this path where you can create a career for yourself that isn't necessarily out there right now. We're in a time and age that, technology is helping us accelerate in different ways, and it's going to be your authentic self and the creativity that you bring to the forefront that's going to make you stand out. So really owning your own differences and what makes you who you are. And I think the second thing I'll go into is if you have an idea or you want to build or create something, I mean, you're all so young, just get started now. Do it today, do it tomorrow. The earlier, the better in my mind, because you have that opportunity to learn from those mistakes that you might go through or a different learning journey. But just getting started is super important. We often put these roadblocks in our head that, let's wait to this, let's wait till I get this. And I think in the chat before someone put that description in of women waiting to get certain credentials or whatever it might look like to have that legitimacy. But I really urge all of you to, if you want to solve a problem, you want to go and build something, just start today. The next thing I'll sort of go off into is just from my personal experience, everyone always tried to push me into a box. And I hate this idea that we should be put into a corner or a box. I don't even believe in the box in general. I think that you know yourself best. And Dr. Sharif touched on the trusting your gut before, and I'll go one step further on that of, yes, reflect on the brain, the heart, and the gut. If 2 out of 3 of those seem to be working out for you, go for it. You don't need anyone else's approval around you. I can tell you all the decisions I've made to date, on paper, you might say, wow, her family really probably loves what she's doing, the direction she's going into. I'm telling you, I don't think they liked my decisions to date to where I am today. The only person that I was lucky to have throughout my journey on my side was always my mom, because she just trusted those decisions that I made in the end. And I did have to sort of put the blinders on, both from community, from the people around me, because to be quite frank with all of you, I'm a very different type of learner. I knew I was different growing up. I take in information in a different way, and I see the world in a very, very different way. And so for me, it was sort of getting out of what the institution is, what the norms are on around us, and challenging the conventional thoughts around me. So I really urge you, whatever you're also doing, even within academia or as you continue in a professional career, challenge the status quo. It may seem right in this moment, but there's a lot that has to be changed. Even as you continue on learning and getting this great education, always remember there's other people that aren't fortunate to access that education, the same books that you might read. And so it's important that you take a moment to stop and reflect, acknowledge your privileges. And if someone's doing something that doesn't seem right, or doesn't have a similar thought to you, or an ideal that doesn't seem progressive, take a moment, sit down with them and extend a hand. Listen to them. I think Chantel had touched on this, but conversations, that's super important in this day and age. Not just shaming people for what they think or believe in, but taking a moment to really, extend your hand out and say, hey, these are my lived experiences. This is what I have learned. Tell me about what your experience was like. So yeah, there were a few different things there, but really in summary, get started, whatever you want to pursue. F the haters, work on yourself, look at brain, heart, and gut. And the third thing is really dialogue will be one of the most important things that you come across throughout your career, whether it's changing the system, changing the mind of someone who's close to you or within your community, and really leaving an impact in this world.
Thank you so much, Ravina. That was a great response. I related so much to everything you said, especially with trusting your gut. I feel like that's the most important for people our age, especially just because we have so many options available to us in university. Like, I'm in my second year and I don't know what I'm doing, And I'm like, hey, I just need to trust my gut. What do I want to do? And just get your foot in the door. I think that's great that you emphasize that, because we're very hesitant nowadays, especially with social media. I feel like a lot of people on social media are very discouraging, but you can also use social media as a tool, like LinkedIn, getting your foot in the door. Maybe you want to connect with someone, say, hey, can I volunteer at your firm or whatever? I know that's something that I've been trying to work on, is just getting my foot in the door and starting. So thank you so much for that response, Ravina. All right, and then I'll pass it off to Megan.
Ravina, I wanted to say I agree with everything you said, and that was awesome, like great advice. Along with the other panelists, I had trust your gut as well on my notes. So no one knows you better than you, so you do what you want to do. For me, for policing, when we talk about privilege, I was fortunate enough to decide I wanted to be a police officer just around 20 years old. My mom, not super supportive. My dad, of course, was. Lucky enough, it didn't take me long and I was on the job, but I wouldn't have changed anything. Obviously, I made mistakes throughout my career at a very young age, and I grew up in policing pretty much. I really admire everyone on here, their thinking and their forward thinking. And when I hear all the work you guys are doing, it's just incredible. I'm jealous. I wish I was doing that and came up with that stuff. So it took me years to be vocal in my profession, as well as have enough courage to be vocal. So at the point, if you're not there yet, don't worry. It comes with experience to be like that. But don't be afraid to speak up throughout your journey. Small goals turn into big goals. So you have an end goal and there's numerous small goals that will take you to your big goal. And it seems like everyone here on this meeting is well on their way. Another note I made was don't let anyone tell you you're not capable. Everyone comes to that, men and women. Hear that kind of stuff. I wish that, I don't have any regrets, but like I said, I'm a part of the Edmonton Women in Policing Working Group. And I wish I found a group of women earlier in my career that I knew had my back. There's ladies on here that joined me today that I admire and respect, and I go to them with my problems. And so when you find that group, which you guys look like you have, rely on them, lean on them, have conversations with them, because someone's always in your corner, and sometimes you just need a pat on the back. And typically, I think overall, we don't do that enough for each other. A lot of us are doing great work in our industries and with education, and we never tell each other we do good work. Actually, we had International Women's Day was not too long ago. Within our working group, we did a raffle and we had a basket, and part of winning this basket was to submit a mentor within policing and what this woman means to you and why they're inspiring. And you should have read the comments. It was so awesome. And it does exist. We just need to pull it out. And when you hear other people talking about women, it's so inspiring, and we all think very highly. We just need to tell each other that more. And I think that when we do, it just fuels our drive even more to meet our goals. So that's pretty much what I said. As corny as it sounds, like, reach out to people to assist you. Always ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. We're not good at everything. And two, growing up in policing, I said this the other day, my training officer at the time, he had 5 years on, and I was like, oh my God, he has 5 years on. He knows everything. And then I got to 5 years and I was like, wait, I don't know everything. And then here I get promoted this last couple of months and I'm like, oh my God, I'm a sergeant. I still don't know everything. And I think that people do. And even though you have a lot of experience and span of control or whatever, you don't know everything all the time. You're constantly learning, and take that in and check in with people throughout your journey, and always rely on your close friends and your mentors moving forward.
Awesome. Thanks for that response, Megan. Yeah, having a network of strong and empowered women is especially important in today's generation. We want to have those women to lean on and, share our experiences with. And I find that that's extremely important within our group, because I know we started off as friends, like everyone here was friends, but I'm able to reach out to Ritika sometimes and say, hey, like, I really want to do this, but I'm kind of too scared, and she's able to give me that motivation, like, no, you need to do it, so having that group of friends that will motivate you is so important. Awesome. So thanks for you guys' responses. Everyone was very insightful. I'm sure we all appreciate it here. So I will pass it off to Ritika.
I really loved hearing everyone's thoughts and ideas. I think it was just very thought-provoking for me as well. So I have like a little list here, but I hope you guys made some lists as well, because I heard a lot of inspiring things. But so we did run a little bit longer, so we'll keep the Q&A period a little bit short. Does anyone have any questions for our panelists? You can type them in the chat as well if you would prefer not to say them out loud, but you can just turn on your mic and speak if you have a question.
I'll just say from my perspective, if anything comes up after the fact, or you just didn't feel confident to put it out there today, I'm always happy to chat. So feel free to reach out to me if that's about the legal profession, if that's about changing careers, if that's about having young kids, all of these things I'm happy to talk about, or something completely different.
I think we have one question, but thank you so much for sharing that, Chantel, as well as if any of you are having trouble like finding the panelists, which I'm sure you won't. I mean, they're pretty accomplished, pretty easy to find online, but you can just send us an email at girl2girlyweg@gmail.com, and then we can kind of figure out what the best way is to like connect you to their socials, I guess. But and then I think Sarah had a question. You can go ahead.
Hi, yes. Sorry about the noise. This whole thing was so motivating, so thank you to all of you. My question was for Chantel. I was just wondering, because the women were so disproportionately represented when you were articling and within your firms, did you feel the need to take on a leadership role outside of the workforce or in the workforce to have your voice heard? And with that, did you ever feel like you weren't strong enough to carry your own platform? And yeah, if anyone else would like to touch on the second part as well, feel free to. But yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, so there were women partners at my firm. The bigger realization for me was realizing I didn't want their lives. And this kind of goes to this, like, you have to figure out if you're doing it to prove it to someone else or you're doing it because you're truly motivated. So I've always been a quite keen person. I generally have side things on the go. And so that's important to me and who I am. I don't think it hurt that I was that type of person in how I was perceived in the organization. But what mattered was those outside things were still important to me. So I wasn't just doing them to impress someone. And I think that's important because what I have seen many people in that profession evolve into is they kind of have to keep up the gig, right? So if they're doing a bunch of stuff and it's not true to them, there will be an expectation that continues as workload increases, as personal commitments increase, and they'll just be really unhappy. And there's like a huge mental health issue in the field of law for this reason, I think. And so I would say, if you want to do things to make yourself stand out, for sure do them, but don't do them if the sole motivator is to kind of impress someone else. There can be more than one motivator. I want to learn this. I enjoy doing this. I want to, grow in a new way, whatever it may be. But I just think it's good to kind of check yourself once again, as I said before.
Thank you.
Sorry if you guys hear the doorbell, my dog. I'll just be really quick. I actually have a question, and it's for anyone who wants to answer, any of our panelists. I mean, like, all of you may not have experienced it. So what would you say your number one tip is for setting boundaries with your loved ones who maybe don't see eye to eye with your career or education or whatever choices?
I'm going to go first. Don't listen to the aunties. For all the brown girls, honestly, do not listen to any aunties or any of the cousins or any of the bullshit garbage talk that people will do behind your back. Just don't listen to them. Do what makes you happy. And I will just echo what Chantel said. I've always kept one foot out the door of academia on purpose. I don't belong to any institution. I'm not going to allow any institution to oppress who I am or any of the projects that I want to be involved in. The amount of systemic inequity that exists at multiple levels of institutional kind of just, in society, and forward their own path. But don't listen to the voices that are constantly, it's just distraction. It's just distraction. I had written somewhere in the chat that, because I'm just noticing the diversity in the room here, and we have a lot of brown girls, and our community can be very toxic, very patriarchal. A lot of says the brown mom, but it's insidious and very overt at the same time. So don't listen to any of the aunties.
I'll add from a little bit different perspective, which is my parents
were very, very blue collar or under, and so their risk tolerance is very low. And I had to have some really great conversations with them to say, I get it. I get where your risk tolerance comes from. And I'm so grateful that, you know, you made the choices you did to enable me to make other choices, but I need you to know I have a safety net. I have things in place to take these risks. And honestly, it opened up really great conversations with my parents where they were like, yeah, that would have been awesome if we could have done that. And so now it's great to see you being able to take some of those risks. It doesn't mean that like I don't get flyer emails from them about things that are on sale and this and that. Like, it is inherently who they are. But I think that kind of tie of, if you are X, you make X, which means you're this kind of person. There's a lot of deconstructing that has to happen around that. And I approach it with love and gratitude for where they're at, but with like a real conversation about how, because of them, I'm in a different spot and I can take more risks. And isn't that exciting?
I appreciate both those answers. They were really good. I love the resources in the chat. And then Chantel, I totally agree. I think it's hard sometimes to start that conversation, like having that initial tough conversation with your parents or whoever loved ones. But I think it does get easier as you keep trying to. At least that's what I've noticed in my case. I feel like I'm taking a somewhat non-traditional career path, like in my community, at least, in my culture. So it's like kind of new, I guess. So that's what I was wondering. I don't think we have any more questions, and we're running like way past the time, so I don't want to keep you guys too long. But I just want to say thank you so much to all of our panelists for contributing all your thoughts. I know I feel very inspired, and I'm maybe considering like planning out some of my life after the panel now that I have new ideas. But yeah, thank you to the participants as well for attending. I hope you all enjoyed the panel. And then again, if anyone is interested in learning more about the panelists, just send me an email and I can figure out what's best. And then I'll also pull the resources from the chat that our wonderful panelists shared. But yeah, again, thank you so much to everyone. Thank you again to our panelists. And you're all pretty much free to go from here. If you have any other questions or comments, you can leave them in the chat and we'll of course stay on and then respond to anything.
Thank you so much, guys. We really appreciate your insight.
Thank you so much. I already feel so inspired.
No.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for joining, Sarah.
Bye, everyone.